They say a house becomes a home through the people who choose to stay in it. The real truth is simpler and harder. Some people were never meant to stay, and knowing that early is the only advantage you are ever given. My name is Gordon Merritt, and I was 63 years old the Christmas morning my parents called me downstairs to the kitchen and told me to pack my things and go. The stairs in that house on Calloway Street creaked on the 3rd and 7th step. I had known that sound my whole life. My parents had no idea what was already done. Welcome back to Channel, where silence is never surrender. If you've ever been told you didn't belong somewhere you had given everything to, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The bag was already packed. It had been packed since the end of September. My full name is Gordon Allen Merritt. I was 63 years old that December, and I had lived in Dunmore, Pennsylvania my entire adult life, on Calloway Street specifically, in the house where I had been born, where I had grown up, and where I had returned in 2008 after my wife Lena passed from a stroke at 57. She had been gone 15 years by that Christmas. The house still had the window box she had planted on the front sill in 2003, though the flowers were long dead, and I had never replaced them, because the empty box looked more like her than anything I might have chosen to fill it with. I had worked in commercial property management for 31 years. I started at Dunmore Realty Group in 1985 as a maintenance coordinator and retired as regional property director in 2016, managing 14 commercial properties across 3 counties. My pension was adequate. My savings were disciplined. I owned no extravagant things and wanted none. My parents, Bernard and Estelle Merritt, had lived on Calloway Street their whole lives. The house was a 3-bedroom colonial with a covered porch and a side yard that flooded every spring, a problem that had never been solved in 50 years. My father had been a high school shop teacher for 32 years. My mother had worked part-time at the Dunmore branch of the county library until her hips gave out. They were not difficult people in the way that dramatic people are difficult. They were difficult in the quieter way, the way that accumulates in small decisions over many years until the accumulation becomes a whole picture. I had moved back in September 2008, 3 months after Lena died, because my parents were both in their late 70s by then, and the house needed management the way old houses always do. Steady attention, minor repairs done promptly, the gradual work of making sure an old building did not become a dangerous one. I moved into the 2nd bedroom upstairs, the one that had been mine growing up. I paid rent, $700 a month, an amount my father proposed, and I accepted without negotiation because it seemed to matter to him that the arrangement have a formal structure. The notarized agreement was the object I want mentioned now, before I go further. It was a document I had prepared in September 2008, when I moved in, a 2-page occupancy agreement drafted by a property attorney, covering my rent obligation, my maintenance responsibilities, and the specific understanding that the arrangement was indefinite and revisable only by mutual written consent. My father had signed it. My mother had signed it. I had the original in a manila envelope in the inside pocket of the winter coat I kept in the closet of the 2nd bedroom upstairs. I had never mentioned it since the day they signed it, because it had never needed to be mentioned. I want to be clear about what I contributed in those 15 years. I paid $700 a month in rent from September 2008 through December 2023, $112,000 across 15 years, without a single missed payment and without complaint. I managed every repair the house required in those 15 years, arranging contractors, supervising work, paying the difference when repair costs exceeded what my parents could cover from their fixed income. In 2011, I hired Dunmore Plumbing and Heating to replace the furnace, a job that cost $9,400, of which my parents contributed $2,000, and I covered the balance. In 2014, I arranged a roof replacement through Kellerman Brothers Roofing, $14,200, entirely at my cost, because the insurance claim was denied on the grounds of pre-existing deterioration. In 2017, I had the side yard drainage issue addressed by a civil engineering firm, Portman Associates, 140, Industrial Lane, Dunmore, at a cost of $6,800. I arranged the lawn maintenance every spring and summer from 2009 through 2023, paying Greenfield Lawn Services $420 per month from April through October each year, a total of approximately $33,000 across 14 seasons. I drove my mother to her orthopedic appointments at Dunmore General every 6 weeks from the time her hip replacement was scheduled in 2013 until a follow-up clearance in 2016, and then resumed driving her to her rheumatology appointments at the same facility every 8 weeks from 2018 through 2022. I am listing these things because they're the record, not because I needed acknowledgement, not because I expected a return. I listed them in my own notes, a yellow legal pad I kept in the same drawer as the occupancy agreement. Because Lena had told me once that the difference between a gift and a loan was whether you wrote it down, and I had never fully decided which category applied. My brother had a different view of all of this. My brother Marcus lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had left Dunmore at 24 and returned only for Christmas and for the occasional summer weekend, when his own schedule allowed. He was personable in the way that people are personable when they are rarely inconvenienced. He brought good wine and told stories about consulting work and called my mother every Sunday at noon without fail, a habit she found more meaningful than 15 years of furnace repairs and lawn maintenance and orthopedic appointments. Marcus had never contributed financially to the Calloway Street house. He had never been asked to. The first sign of what was coming arrived in October, when Marcus called my parents during one of his Sunday calls, and apparently spent a significant portion of it discussing what should happen to the house after they were gone. I know this because my mother mentioned it at dinner the following Tuesday, with particular careful casualness that signals a conversation that has already been decided. My mother made pot roast on Tuesdays. The kitchen smelled of brown meat and rosemary and the particular warmth of an oven that had been running since midday. The overhead light above the table was slightly too bright. It had always been slightly too bright, and it gave the room the quality of a space where things were clearly visible whether you wanted them to be or not. Marcus thinks we should look into the options, my mother said. What options? I said. She looked at her plate. For the house. For when we're gone. My father said nothing. He was cutting his meat with the particular focused attention he applied to things he did not want to discuss. There's a lot of equity in this house. My mother said, Marcus says it would be irresponsible not to plan. I said nothing. He's talked to a realtor, she said. Just exploratory. I nodded once. I did not ask what exploring meant in this context. I had spent 31 years in commercial property management. I knew exactly what exploring meant. My throat tightened. I looked at the pot roast and thought about the furnace and the roof and the drainage work and the 14 years of lawn maintenance. And I said nothing further. That was October 14th. Dr. Claudia Weiss, my general practitioner at Dunmore Family Medicine. She had been my physician since 2009, had managed my blood pressure and my knee and 3 years of insomnia after Lena died, had an appointment with me on October 22nd at 11 a.m. for my annual physical. She asked me at the end of the appointment if there was anything else on my mind. I told her about the house conversation. She listened. She said, "How's that sit with you?" I told her it sat the way most things sat, not comfortably, but not unexpectedly either. She wrote something in my chart. I did not ask what. Marcus came for Thanksgiving. The house on Calloway Street had the smell it always had in November. Dried leaves tracked in from the porch. The particular mustiness of a house closed up against the cold. The coffee my mother ran from 6 a.m. without pause. Marcus arrived on Wednesday, the 22nd at 4:15 p.m. He came into the front door with his roller bag and his good coat and the confident ease of a man arriving somewhere that has been maintained for him. He shook my hand at the door. He said I was looking well. I said he was too. The first conversation about the house happened that evening, after dinner. My father had gone to bed early. His back had been troubling him since September, and he retired by 8 most evenings. Marcus and my mother sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light at full brightness, and I sat across from them, and the conversation began the way these conversations always begin, obliquely, as though it is about something other than what it is about. Gordon, Marcus said, "I've been doing some thinking." "All right," I said, "about the long term. For Mom and Dad. About the house." I said nothing. "The market in Dunmore has been strong," Marcus said. "Jim Callahan over at Premier Realty thinks this place could list at $350, maybe $375. My stomach dropped. Not at the number, at the matter-of-factness of it. The way he said it as though the house were already an asset being assessed rather than a place where people lived. Mom and Dad are in good health, I said. There's no urgency. There's never urgency until there is, Marcus said. He said it pleasantly. He was always pleasant. My mother looked at her hands. She said, Marcus has been talking to a financial planner. I see, I said. I said nothing further. The following morning, Thanksgiving, at 8:47 a.m., Marcus came downstairs while I was making coffee. The kitchen had the early gray light of a November morning, the window above the sink showing the bare maple in the side yard, the drainage channel running properly for the first time in 50 years. The coffee maker was the same machine my mother had owned since 2004, a Mr. Coffee with a cracked carafe handle she had never replaced. Marcus poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter. You know I'm not trying to push you out, he said. I said nothing. You've been good to them, he said. I want you to know I see that. My chest went still, not because he was being cruel. He wasn't. Because a particular way he said it made clear that seeing it and doing anything about it were entirely separate categories in his mind. I appreciate that, I said. My voice was flat and even. The thing is, Marcus said, Mom and Dad need to think about their security. A house this size, the maintenance alone. I manage the maintenance, I said. He paused. I know, but you won't always be here. I kept my face neutral. I've been here 15 years. Right, he said, and that's been great, but it can't go on forever. I said nothing. He refilled his coffee and went back upstairs. The conversation with my parents on the Saturday after Thanksgiving was more direct. The living room had the feel of a space that had been prepared. My parents on the sofa together, a posture that suggested arrangement, Marcus in the armchair with his legs crossed. The afternoon light came to the front window at a low angle and lit the dust on the mantel. My mother said, We've been thinking about a transition. What kind of transition? I said. We'd like to have the house assessed. My father said. It was the first time he had spoken directly on the subject. His voice was careful, the voice of a man who has rehearsed a sentence. We think it might make sense to sell, my mother said, while the market is strong. We'd move somewhere more manageable. And the arrangement? I said, I meant the occupancy agreement. I did not say so directly. My mother looked at Marcus. Marcus said, We'd give you plenty of time to find something. We're not trying to be. How much time? I said. My father said, We were thinking spring, after the holidays. Something in me went to the place just past cold, the place where temperature no longer registers because a decision has already been made in a register below feeling. I said, All right. I said nothing else. On December 3rd, Marcus called my parents and apparently confirmed the listing plan. I know because my mother came to the kitchen doorway at 7:22 p.m. while I was washing the dinner dishes and said, with the careful gentleness she used when she was delivering news she found uncomfortable, Marcus spoke with Jim Callahan. He's going to come by in January to do a formal assessment. My hands went cold on the dish I was holding. That's fine, I said. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Gordon, she said, you know this isn't about you. I know, I said. I did not turn around. She went back to the living room. The television came on. I finished the dishes. I had paid the December rent check on December 1st. $700. Same as every month for 15 years. Deposited in my parents' account at First Dunmore Bank as always. I paid it because I had always paid it, and because I was not going to stop being the person who paid it simply because someone else had decided that person's presence was now inconvenient. On December 14th, I drove my mother to her rheumatology appointment at Dunmore General. Dr. Patricia Sen, rheumatologist, 6th floor wing, 9:30 a.m. appointment, a 40-minute drive each way on winter roads. I sat in the waiting room for an hour and 12 minutes. I drove her home. She thanked me. She did not mention the house. The second named professional in this story is James Alderton, occupancy and tenancy attorney at Alderton Law on Commerce Street, Dunmore. I had called his office on December 2nd at 9:15 a.m., the morning after the November Saturday conversation in the living room. His assistant had scheduled me for December 10th at 2 p.m. I had brought the manila envelope with the occupancy agreement. James Alderton read the document in 4 minutes without expression. Then he read it again. "This is a valid occupancy agreement," he said. "Executed correctly, notarized, witnessed. Your parents signed this in 2008. "Yes," I said. "The mutual written consent clause," he said, looking at the second page. "Any modification to this arrangement requires written agreement from both parties." "Yes," I said. "They cannot simply ask you to leave without formal written notice satisfying the terms here," he said. "And even then, in Pennsylvania, the notice period for a long-term occupant, particularly one paying documented monthly rent, is significant." My throat tightened. "How significant?" I said. He told me. I said nothing for a moment. Something in me settled like a foundation that has been tested and found solid. "One more question," I said. "My contributions to the property over 15 years, documented. Does that affect the picture?" Alderton looked at me over his reading glasses. "Tell me about the contributions," he said. I told him. I had the legal pad with me. I drove home from Alderton's office on Commerce Street at 4:08 p.m. on December 10th. The winter sky had gone dark early the way it does in Pennsylvania in December, a flat gray that turned to charcoal by 4 o'clock without any visible transition. The roads were dry. The heater in my car ran reliably. I had owned the car for 9 years, a habit of keeping things that still worked. The house on Calloway Street was lit when I pulled into the driveway. The kitchen light was on. The porch light was on. The window box on the front sill was dark, which it always was in winter. I went inside. I said good evening. I went upstairs to the second bedroom, and I sat at the desk by the window with the legal pad and the manila envelope and the notes I had taken at Alderton's office. The desk lamp was the same desk lamp I had used in high school, a brass gooseneck with a warm bulb that threw a circle of light on the desk and left the rest of the room in a dimness I had always found useful for thinking. Outside the window, Calloway Street was quiet. A neighbor's dog barked once and went silent. The radiator in the corner ticked in its slow, irregular way. I thought about what Alderton had told me. The occupancy agreement was valid and enforceable. My parents could not ask me to leave without formal written notice, and the notice period for a paying long-term occupant in Pennsylvania ran considerably longer than the spring timeline Marcus had assumed. Beyond that, my documented contributions to the property, the furnace, the roof, the drainage, the lawn services, created what Alderton called a colorable claim for equitable contribution, meaning a court could reasonably find that I contributed materially to the property's maintenance and value in ways that merited consideration independent of any rent arrangement. I was not going to use any of this as a weapon. That was the first decision, and I made it clearly. What I was going to do was something different, something that required no confrontation, no ultimatum, no raised voice. It required only that I do what I had always done, be precise, be documented, and wait. I had 3 months before the January assessment, 3 months in which everything could proceed exactly as my parents and Marcus assumed it would, pleasantly, predictably, with Gordon in the second bedroom upstairs being cooperative and undemanding as he had always been. I called Alderton's office at 9 a.m. on December 11th and asked him to prepare a formal written notice of my occupancy rights under the agreement. Not a threat, not a filing, just a document that existed and was dated and was ready if needed. He said he would have it prepared by December 17th. I continued paying the December lawn maintenance invoice, the final bill of the season, for $120, on December 12th, as I had every year. I noted the payment on the legal pad. Something in me understood that the next weeks required the same kind of patience I had applied to the furnace and the roof and the drainage and the 40-minute drives to rheumatology. Not anger, not calculation for its own sake. Simply the continuation of being exactly who I had always been, in a situation where being exactly who I had always been was the only move that mattered. I ate dinner with my parents that evening. My father had made soup. We talked about the neighbor's dog and about whether the forecast was calling for snow before Christmas. Nobody mentioned the house. My hands were steady on the soup bowl. Christmas was on a Monday that year. Marcus flew in on December 22nd, arriving at Scranton Wilkes Barre at 2:40 p.m. My father drove to pick him up, an hour each way, a trip I had offered to make and been told was unnecessary. Marcus arrived at the house on Calloway Street at 4:55 p.m., rolling bag, good coat, bottle of scotch from my father. He was in good spirits. The listing with Jim Callahan was apparently going well. Callahan had confirmed the $360,000 estimate and was suggesting a February listing to catch the spring market. My mother told me this at dinner on December 22nd while passing the bread basket. She said it the way she said most things that made her slightly uncomfortable, quickly, in the middle of another sentence, as though speed reduced the weight of it. I said, "That sounds like a solid plan." Marcus looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized, the slight recalibration of someone who expected resistance and did not receive it. "You're okay with the timeline?" he said. "I'm not the one selling," I said. My father looked at his bread. On December 23rd, Marcus called Jim Callahan from the living room at 10:15 a.m. I could hear the conversation from the kitchen, where I was making the coffee. Callahan was apparently suggesting some staging work before the listing. New paint in the hallway, some landscaping in the spring. Marcus said he would handle the coordination. He said Gordon was flexible and had always been accommodating. My throat tightened slightly at that particular word. Accommodating. I poured my coffee. On December 24th, Marcus suggested at dinner that it might make sense for me to start looking at apartments. He said it pleasantly, the way he said everything, and he added that he had looked at a few options near downtown Dunmore that seemed reasonable for a retiree. He said the word retiree the way people say it when they mean something else, when they mean person with limited options. I said, "I'll keep that in mind." I said nothing further. That evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I sat in the second bedroom at the gooseneck desk and read through documents Alderton had prepared. They were clean and precise, the kind of documents that said exactly what they needed to say without an extra word. I put them back in a manila envelope and put the envelope in my coat pocket. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. The temperature was 19 degrees at 6 a.m. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the pine candle my mother lit every December 25th without exception. There was frost on the inside of the second bedroom window, which there had been every winter I could remember, a small failure of the original glazing that had never been worth replacing. Marcus came downstairs at 7:30 a.m. in the good mood of someone who has slept well and expects the day to go as planned. At 8:15 a.m., my parents called me downstairs. The kitchen was bright with the Christmas morning light. Cold, white, the particular clarity of a day with no clouds. My father stood near the counter. My mother stood near the table. Marcus stood near the doorway to the hall with his coffee. A third professional had been in motion since the previous week. Arthur Breen, real estate and occupancy specialist at Alderton Law, a colleague of James Alderton's, brought in specifically for his expertise in Pennsylvania occupancy disputes, had filed a formal notice of occupancy rights with the Dunmore County Recorder's Office on December 20th at 9:42 a.m., attaching the executed 2008 occupancy agreement and a documented schedule of my 15-year contributions to property. The filing was a matter of public record. Jim Callahan would find at the moment he ran a title search before the February listing. Arthur Breen had told me, in our meeting on December 18th at 3 p.m., that the filing changed nothing immediately. It simply ensured that the full picture existed in a place where it could not be overlooked. I had not mentioned this filing to anyone in the house on Calloway Street. My chest went still in the kitchen doorway. The coffee smell was strong. The pine candle was on the windowsill. My father looked at me. His expression was carefully arranged. "Gordon," he said, "your mother and I have been thinking." "All right," I said. "We think it's best," my mother said, "if you found your own place before spring. We think it's time." Marcus said nothing. He was looking at his coffee. My father said, "This is no longer your home, Gordon. It's time to pack your things and go." Something in me went to a place below all of it, below the 15 years and the furnace and the roof and the drives to Dunmore General and the $700 every month. A place that was not cold and not warm. "Just clear," I said. "All right." I picked up my coat from the hook by the door. The manila envelope was in the inside pocket. I carried my bag to the car. I sat in the back seat. I closed the door. I stood in the driveway for a moment in the 19-degree Christmas morning air and looked at the house. The covered porch, the empty window box, the frost on the upstairs windows. Then I went back inside. My parents were still in the kitchen. Marcus was still near the hallway door. I set the manila envelope on the kitchen table. Before I go, I said, "I'd like you to read this." My mother looked at the envelope. My father looked at the envelope. "What is it?" Marcus said. "A document." I said nothing further. My father picked it up. He opened it. He read the first page. His hands went still. He passed it to my mother without speaking. She read it. Her face went pale in the cold Christmas light. Marcus crossed the room and looked over her shoulder. The document was the occupancy agreement they had signed in September 2008. Attached to it was the Alderton filing notice, dated December 20th, and the 16-page schedule of documented contributions. Every payment, every contractor invoice, every data receipt, the full 15-year record laid out in the same methodical format I had used for 31 years of property management. The room was quiet. Marcus said, "Gordon, you can read the rest at your convenience," I said. "The important thing is on page 2, the mutual consent clause." My father set the document on the table. His hands were very still. "There's also a filing," I said, "with the county recorder. It's a matter of public record. Jim Callahan will find it when he runs a title search." My mother said nothing. Her hands were folded on the table the way hands fold when a person is working very hard to remain composed. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I'm not making demands. I've lived here 15 years and kept this house in order for 15 years and paid my rent for 15 years. That record exists now, whether anyone acknowledges it or not." Marcus said, "We didn't know about the filing." "I'll be upstairs," I said. "Merry Christmas." I went upstairs. I made my bed. I came back down at noon and made the Christmas lunch I had been scheduled to make, a standing rib roast. 3 hours at low heat, the same meal I had made every Christmas for 15 years because neither of my parents had the energy for it anymore. Nobody discussed the document. The roast was exactly what it should have been. The January assessment with Jim Callahan was canceled on January 3rd. My mother called Callahan's office at 9 a.m. and told him they had decided to table the listing indefinitely. Callahan called Marcus. Marcus called me on January 4th at 11:15 a.m. "You didn't have to do it that way," he said. "What way would you preferred?" I said. He did not answer. We spoke for 4 more minutes about nothing in particular and hung up. The occupancy situation on Calloway Street settled back into what it had always been: quiet, functional, structured. My parents did not raise the subject of selling again that year. The mutual written consent clause meant they could not move unilaterally, and the county filing meant any future title search would surface the full record immediately. Not a weapon, a fact, one that had always existed, and now simply existed in the right place. In March, I arranged a spring lawn service renewal with Greenfield, $420 per month. April through October, same as always. I noted it on the legal pad. I paid the April rent check on the 1st of the month, $700, same as it had always been. My mother's rheumatology appointment was on March 18th at 9:30 a.m. I drove her there and back. She did not mention the Christmas document on the drive. On the way home, she asked if I thought the window box should have something new in it this spring. I said I thought Lena had liked geraniums. My mother said she thought she was right. We stopped at the garden center on the way back from the appointment and bought a flat of red geraniums and planted them in the window box that afternoon, both of us in the cold March sun with our gloves off because the soil was too fine to work with gloves on. Gordon Merritt, 64 years old, and still on Calloway Street, where he has always been. The legal pad is in the drawer. The occupancy agreement is in the envelope. The county filing is a matter of public record that will remain a matter of public record for as long as the house stands. None of this is revenge in any ordinary sense. It is simply the record doing what records do, existing precisely in the place where precision matters. What I understand now that I did not understand when I was younger is that documentation is not distrust. It is the opposite. It is a decision to take something seriously enough to make it undeniable. The people who love you well do not need the record, but the record is not for them. The geraniums were the same red as the ones Lena planted in 2003. I noticed that. If you were standing in that kitchen on Christmas morning with the filing already made and the document in your pocket, what would you have done? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.